Well, Tim, thank you so much for joining me again. It's been, gosh, a couple years now on Linch with the Leader. It is an honor to have you, buddy.
Mike, I love hanging out with you. If nothing else, we're going to have a good time.
Always, always. And the first time you did it, we were just hoping somebody would listen in. So we actually, I don't know if anybody's listening, but we just keep putting stuff out for people to listen to if they want to. Well, I love how God's using it. It's so funny. I run into guys all the time. They're like, man, I got to hear Tim Elmore. I read something from Tim Elmore, and they all come back with the same thing. Tim just, God, I don't know what he does. He just makes me better. And so I want to say thank you to you from all the people. I was with a guy, Sterling Brown, last night. I was with Sterling, and he's just like, man, every time I'm with Tim, he just makes me better. So thanks for all you do for leaders, Tim.
Well, Mike, thank you for saying that. But I feel you're the same way. You're a contagious man. And everybody I meet that knows Mike Linch loves Mike Linch.
Well,
so
I
thanks for letting me
that.
crash your party here.
I'm glad we keep everybody else in silent. So that's good. I got plenty that know. Right. So, you spend your life, and we talked about this a few minutes ago. You've sort of been the next guy, right? You're the guy looking back at the generations. Mm-hmm. As you look back, what's changing most during your time in leadership, in the leadership landscape that we're living in?
Wow. Well, I think a cursory quick answer to that is the pace of change, which everybody would say, duh. But when I look back on last year, 2020, I guess that's maybe more than last year, it's a couple of years ago now, but 2020 in my mind was the great accelerator. Whatever was happening already, it just accelerated it. So think with me, Mike. Didn't we all say, oh, we need to do technology better? Well, suddenly we had to do technology better.
That's right.
Schools, churches, you name it. We need to do diversity, equity, and inclusion better. Suddenly we had to do it better. The protest forced us to. So I think whatever was going on, it just sped it up. And I don't know that we're going to slow down much. So leaders are going to need to hang on. We both need to have foresight for sure and model the way. But I think for many leaders, it's going to be hang on for dear life. The pace of change won't just be pushed by us. We'll be hanging on as it happens to us.
And there's been, I know you hit this at the beginning of your new book that we're going to talk about today. There's been a big fallout. I mean, there's a lot of leaders that took out the white flag and said, yeah, I'm not up for this next thing.
Yeah. Fortune magazine came out with a feature article called The Great CEO Exodus of 2020. And I put this in the book, but I was flabbergasted when I looked at the data. In the first quarter of 2020, the CEO of Disney stepped down, the CEO of Hulu stepped down, CEO of MGM, Harley Davidson, IBM. I mean, it was just on and on and on and on and on. And so you at first you go, oh, that's a coincidence, but there's so many you go, that's not a coincidence. No. So I'm sure there were many reasons. For some of them, it was just time to resign or retire. But I think for many, they looked ahead and said, I can't do this anymore. It's exhausting. You might have had a moment, Mike, where you thought, do I want to do something else right now?
Yep, absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. And so just to add to that, this, I'm sure, but this last, 2021, there was a Inc. magazine carried a feature article called The Great Resignation of 2021. So in a 3-month period of time, 11.5 million employees just resigned. Now, I think for many, they resigned to find a pandemic-proof job. They thought, I'm going to work from home. I'm going to do this on my own. I don't need to answer to a boss or whatever. Some will regret it. But I think many people just said, I can't do what I've done anymore. And this is a time for me, this is my exhortation to your listeners. This is a time not to step back, but to step up. We've got to step up and say, God, make me enough for this moment, because people need a healthy, life-giving leader in front of them. And that's what we need to be.
I love that. And, it is, there were seasons in all of it. I remember talking to a church planner, and I said, you know what? We're all equal now.
Yeah.
With the whole church landscape, we're all church planners, because this landscape is so different. When did God birth this new book in your heart? At what point in this crazy season did this book, The 8 Paradoxes of Great Leadership, when did that get birthed in your heart, Tim?
It was years ago. And so things kind of marinate inside, how this goes for yourself. But I would say the origins really happened first in a green room, right before a conference. I was sitting with 16 CEOs and I thought, man, I'm going to turn this into a focus group here. So I threw out the question, tell me what you think about this. I said, do you think leading today is different or harder than it was leading when you first learned to lead? And I actually thought I'd get a mixed bag, but every one of them said, absolutely, it's harder today. And when I said, wouldn't you think it'd be harder back when we were in our 20s and we first started leading and we didn't know anything about leadership?
That's right.
But every one of them stuck to their guns. And so that put me on a search. Why is it happening? And so in the book, I actually write about this. I think we've moved from complicated to complex. And what I mean by that is complicated is hard, okay? Yep. You're a kid in math class in high school or whatever, and there's a problem on the board up there, and you doze off and take a 5-minute nap, which you and I both did.
Yep.
But we wake up 5 minutes later. The problem is no harder, no easier. It's still hard, but unchanged. Complex is a little different. Complex is the problem is evolving. Complex might be you're an air traffic controller and you doze off for 5 minutes. You wake up, oh my gosh, 4 crashes. Here comes another one coming in. It's worse and I have no idea. I'm overwhelmed. So you asked earlier, what's the big change? I think the change is the anxiety levels that leaders have and the certainty or lack of certainty that we have when we make decisions. Mike, I heard leaders say this last year, I felt like I made a year's worth of decisions in 1 month.
Yeah.
Did you feel that way?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So this is not a whining session. I'm actually a hopeful person, but I think we need to reckon we are in a different day. To long for the past and mama's going to sing us to sleep. We need to get past that and say, I've got to be enough now for this moment. And I think we can be. I really do.
I totally agree. And I know during the pandemic, I did a call every Friday. I had mayors, police chiefs. I had somebody that worked state legislator, college president, large healthcare system. We would gather every Friday morning during the pandemic for a call. And we did it to encourage them.
Yes.
And I did it so I could stay informed. Yeah. You know what I learned at the end of those calls every Friday? Nobody knew what was going on.
Yeah.
Nobody. And it was uncertain for the people who were delivering certainty were uncertain. And though we've come out of that mode of uncertainty's change, and I thought the paradoxes you hit in this book were so timely in leadership. So before we dive into these, explain to everybody what you mean by a paradox. So as we hit these different topics, unpack what that means to you.
Well, that's a great question. Thanks for asking. These paradoxes are in response to the dilemma we just painted in the minds of listeners. So I believe, well, first of all, everybody knows a paradox in itself is a seemingly contradictory set of realities that you think those could not go together, but they do. Yep. It's like an irony. It's like a contradiction. It's an oxymoron. So I'll give you a good example, Mike. You and I both live in the greater metro Atlanta area. Do you remember 2020, we heard on the radio that there were way fewer cars on the road because we were all quarantined, but the accident numbers went up. There were more accidents on the road with fewer cars. That's a paradox. Yep. But you know the explanation, because there were fewer cars on the road, people drove more recklessly. They thought, I don't need to pay attention. And they weren't paying attention. So I think there's a whole bunch of these. And I think in leadership, the response we must have today to these crazy times is to practice these seemingly contradictory realities. And we'll talk about this in a minute. But I think it makes us exactly what our people need. And they go, I don't even know why I want to stay with you, but I want to stay with you.
That's good. That's really good. And what I love about this, Tim, is you're practicing this. You lead a company, you lead leaders, you work with them, but you also consult, coach, develop, train. Your teams are going across the country with Habitudes and all that you do. So you're a practitioner and you are coaching and working. So what I wanted to do today is look at these from almost 3 vantage points.
Okay.
One is, I remember, the early days of leadership, man, everything is out the front windshield. I mean, I'm not in charge, but I'm sort of in charge, but I'm looking at the landscape. And then there's the season where you grab the wheel and it's like you're mid-career, growing big. You got big dreams. And then there's the season we all get to in leadership where I've got more in the rearview mirror than I do. And we'll celebrate. So I've been in ministry 30 years, 25 years at North Star. Then the rearview mirror is getting to be a lot bigger than it used to be. Yeah. So I think we hit these paradoxes and we look at each of them very differently based on our season of leadership.
Yeah, I do.
And where we're at. So what I want to do is we're going to take 3 of them. There's 8 of them in the book. And man, you have got to, I'm just telling you, I was telling Tim, we're taking our leadership group through this book because it is so good. In this, you keep using the phrase uncommon leaders. So why as we talk about these paradoxes, why do you call these people who navigate this change so well uncommon leaders?
I call them uncommon, Mike, because I really do think the leaders that practice these paradoxes are rare. We think you're going to be one or the other. Like, for instance, the first paradox is, I think uncommon leaders are both confident and humble. Isn't it true you find one or the other most of the time? He's either really confident, in fact, overconfident, or, oh, he's so humble. I like that, but I don't know if we're going to reach our goal. He's so humble, I actually think we need both. And so there's 8 of these that seem like they couldn't go together. That's what makes us uncommon. And really, Mike, when I stop and think about it, all of these 8 paradoxes fall under the umbrella of social and emotional intelligence.
That's right.
So it's behavioral and emotional skill sets that are within the reach of everybody. I'm not saying in this book, well, hope your IQ is 140 above, you'll be a great leader. I don't think it's IQ. I think it's EQ. So that's what I really talk about in this. But I think it's uncommon, and I want to make it less uncommon among leaders. Yeah.
So for a leader, and I want to dive into that one on this confidence and humility, when you're in your 20s, early 30s, how does it look to be confident and humble when you're not in charge? You're not the guy yet. Yeah. You may be still behind somebody. How does that play out for a leader like that?
Wow. I think in your 20s, I'm remembering my 20s. It was a distant memory, but I do remember my 20s. There I was serving with John Maxwell on his staff in San Diego. I remember I realized John needs me to be confident about the department he's put me in charge of. He'd never run a college department, so he couldn't say, here's exactly what I want you to do. And I'm kind of glad he didn't. I'm glad he wasn't prescriptive in his leadership. However, I would have been stupid to not be humble. So every time I sat down with that man, it wasn't hard. I was very humble. And so something I have learned along the way that I think a 20-something really ought to practice: when you speak in a meeting, speak as if you believe you're right. But when you listen as if you believe you're wrong.
Oh, man.
That makes me so winsome, especially as a young professional, perhaps, that I don't know what I'm doing. I don't have 30 years of experience, Mike, like you do now. So I just believe those, and I try to offer really practical steps like that in the book. That's my assignment this year, even at my age. I need to speak as if I believe I'm right. I need to listen as if I believe I'm wrong. And when I do that, I'm a better leader. Yeah.
That's really, so how has that changed for you? You're not the 20-something leader anymore. Yeah. You're the guy now. The buck stops with you and it comes to your desk. How does this confidence, humility balance? What's harder now for you as a older leader, a seasoned leader?
Well, I tell you what's harder. I find myself reaching back into history more and saying, well, let me tell you, when we first started growing leaders back in 2003, blah, 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 blah. And I started realizing they don't want a history lesson. I do think it's important for us to learn from the past. You would agree with that.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
But you and I both have a lot in the rearview mirror, and we want to tell those stories back in the good old days. And I realized I have a lot of young professionals on my team, and I'm going, I need to stop the history lessons and at least exhibit to them, I am more excited about today than I ever was in the past. Now I need to be, I can't fake it. But I think that's my challenge right now, is to say, if we were starting this whole thing over, if we were to walk out of the building, walk back in and say, if we were starting over, what would we do? That makes me open to brand new ideas, because I'm realizing, oh gosh, if I would have started this in 2022 instead of 2003, I do a lot of things. I do everything digital,
Yep.
So I'll stop there, but I feel like that's where I am right now. I need to stop with the history lessons all the time and start, doing some prophecy lessons.
Yeah, that's right. You're right. Well, it's so funny because on your podcast with Andy, and it was so good, and Andy has such great, if people think Andy's only a great speaker, they've never listened to his podcast, because he is so inquisitive and he's sharp with his questions. But you talked about learning to say, as a leader, wow, not how.
Yeah.
So unpack that a little bit. That was a great line.
Yeah, it is. So when we first hear a new idea, let's say from a younger team member with less experience than us, you and I are both go, well, wait a minute. How are you going to do that?
Yeah.
You don't even know what's the data on that? And I think, Andy, I love talking about this concept. Saying wow instead of how means my first response is, I see the vision that you see. What a cool idea. Now, we may need to go back and say, how are we going to pull this off? It may not be as easy as we think it is, but I think the wow instead of how doesn't, as an older leader, I just do the how thing because I've done too many things that didn't work. And I can tell you how many times it's not going to work. And nobody wants to hear that. In fact, I think that causes people to shut up. If I don't have people that are, if I'm only having a team around me that I don't listen to, they're going to stop sharing ideas.
That's right.
And so I've got to make sure that I'm the person that's listening just as much, if not more, as I am talking. Yeah.
That's so good. And you gave a great illustration in the book of Disney and Bob Iger. I think everybody is familiar with Disney, but what they may not be familiar with is the story of Disney's transition, and especially with Bob Iger. So unpack that a little bit.
Okay. It is a fun story. So Bob Iger was the CEO of the Walt Disney Enterprise, really everything. And he had never led a company before that sold plush toys, theme park tickets, animated movies. He'd been at ABC, which is a subsidiary of Disney, but he'd never run Disney. So he entered the role, and he's the confidence and humility guy, I think. He entered the role and he said, I realized they needed a confident leader. You can't run this big machine. But he said, I couldn't pretend that I knew something I didn't. So Bob started meeting with his team that he was in charge of and asking them how it runs. And so he said, I was immediately aware of how awkward this was. I hear this guy's about to ask me for directions, and I'm going, what are we doing now? How do we do that? So I love the fact that Bob said, I wasn't about to pretend to be someone I wasn't or to know something I didn't. But at the same time, he said, that could not keep me from leading. So I'm in new territory. And here's the greatest way this played out, Mike, that I just love. So Bob Iger followed Michael Eisner, and Michael had been an icon at Disney. But toward the end, Michael Eisner was way too confident, not enough humble. In fact, if I can just be really blunt, in all due respect to Michael Eisner, who is still alive, he was a pompous and arrogant and cocky, way overconfident. And the board was put off by that. And they fired him. They said, you're gone. Bob Iger steps in. Bob Iger was very aware that one of the last big conversations that Michael Eisner had when he was CEO was with Steve Jobs, attempting to buy Pixar. And it never worked out. You can imagine these two big egos at the table just butting heads. And both would walk away and say, no, not going to happen, because nobody wanted to be humble.
Yep.
So Bob is aware that that's happened. Bob lets some time pass, lets the dust settle, but contacts Steve Jobs, gets on the phone with him and says, Steve, I know Michael and you had reached an impasse, and I totally understand. Pixar's amazing. Disney's huge. But then Bob just said, after he paused, Steve, I got to tell you though, I just can't help but think we might be better together. And Steve's response was, that's not a crazy idea. So when you lean in with humility,
Mm.
it actually invites humility.
That's
People reciprocate. If I'm cocky, they're going to go, oh yeah, you want to have a contest? And we men are the worst at this.
Yep.
We got our pride, So Bob just says, and notice he says something, this may be a crazy idea. Now, he didn't think it was, but you lead with that because you got to let them know, I know I'm borrowing here. I'm presuming that maybe you want to even sell. But here's what's cool. Steve Jobs said that's not a crazy idea. They end up dialoguing. Disney does buy Pixar. And then the very company that purchased the other puts the other one in charge of all the animation. That's what's crazy. Talk about confident and humble. So that'd be like me, Mike, I'm going to hire you. Now, would you tell me what to do?
That's right.
What? So I don't know. I just think that's a weird leader, but that's the leader we need today. People long for both confident. Here, I'm sorry, I'm monopolizing this conversation.
No, this is great. I love this.
I think people won't follow a leader that's not confident. We need confidence in our leader. We're always going to be wondering, am I in the wrong place? If I don't have a leader that's full of excitement and confidence, they're going to make the goal. But we also know we want to see a little humility in that leader because we want to make sure he's not smoking something, he's not drinking something, So confidence makes my leadership believable, but humility makes my confidence believable. They see I'm a human and I realize I don't have all the answers and I need others to get to the goal. So that's why I think it's paramount. I think anybody listening would go, yep, I see that. But boy, that's hard to do. And
it is hard to do.
Yeah. For me right now, it's hard on any given day. Sometimes it's hard for me to be confident. Sometimes it's hard for me to be humble. At 3 p.m., they may need you to be confident. At 4 p.m., they may need you to be humble. You've got to read them before you lead them. So
it is a great tension that every leader walks, and the great ones figure out, especially the ones, that like I know you talk about Jim Collins in the book, that level 5 leader, that they figure out somehow to walk this. And you and I both also share in common our faith, and this is a spiritual leadership podcast. Who in scripture, as you think back among the great leaders of scripture, who is somebody that balanced confidence and humility well?
Well, I think of a few right now. Moses, I mean, he knew he had to be confident. They're about to walk through a wilderness and the Israelites are going, where? Who? What?
That's right. That's right.
So he had to be confident. But do you remember Moses even described himself as the most humble leader? I said that's confidence about my humility.
Yep.
So we're both laughing now, but I really think he had this great humility. But listen, I think the Apostle Paul, you read the epistles, that guy was confident about the theology he had embraced. But then the next phrase, he's going, and I'm the chief of sinners. My gosh, I was awful. In Philippians 3, he says, I was the Pharisee of the Pharisee, but I put all that behind me. I just think many of the leaders, we see David very confident as a warrior and then a humble poet. So I think we can read in scripture these. By the way, you know what I did, Mike, that was really fun for me just personally, but since this is a faith podcast, I went through all 8 paradoxes and I watched, did Jesus do these? Absolutely.
Wow.
Oh my gosh. Go through the Gospels and see Jesus confident and then humble. He even said, I'm meek and lowly and gentle. Wow. The Savior of the world.
That's right.
Confident and humble. So it's kind of, I won't tease all those, but I dare anybody listening, if you get this book, read the Gospels next to it, and you'll see Jesus, the leader, not just the healer and savior, practicing these so brilliantly.
That's so fantastic. And it's interesting you bring up Paul, because most people would never, Paul, he was bombastic. He was strong. And so I read a book. I took a group of leaders through a book last year, Paul and His Companions by Richard Blackaby. And it was interesting. And so he broke out every companion and he said, isn't it funny? Paul never started a letter. He didn't recognize all the people that got him there, which is humility.
Yes.
It was so interesting. I never thought about that before.
Yeah, that's a great point.
The second one I wanted to talk about was uncommon leaders leverage both their vision. This is so good. Never thought about this. Their vision and their blind spots. Talk to me about that a little bit. That's so good.
Yeah, it's so oxymoronic, but Mike, I put a case study with each one of these paradoxes. So there's a live embodiment of the paradox. So my case study on this one was Sarah Blakely, the founder of Spanx right here in Atlanta, Georgia. So Sarah graduates from Florida State back in 93, something like that. And she sells fax machines door to door, and she's wearing pantyhose and high heels, and it's the hot Florida sun. And she's going, this is not right. So she cuts off her stockings, the Spanx that women wear.
Yeah.
And she goes, oh, this looks good. And yet it's got some firm hold here. Here I am talking about this like I know what I'm talking about. But here's what's fun. Sarah now realizes, okay, I've got this product I've created, and I found a manufacturer to make it. Where am I going to distribute this? So she calls up an executive at Neiman Marcus department stores, gets a 10-minute meeting. It's a short meeting. She walks into this female executive. She made sure it was a female because, ladies are going to understand. 5 minutes into the meeting, Mike, she realizes I am not getting anywhere here. She's probably heard 50 proposals today. This is not going. So Sarah stands up. Remember, she's a young 20-something, stands up and says, would you follow me? And the woman says, excuse me? Would you follow me into the restroom? I want to show you something. So the lady follows into the restroom. Sarah tries on the Spanx right there on the spot. Sold.
That's
right
unbelievable.
There. Yes. So, that's audacity. But so here's the deal. So Neiman Marcus decides to beta test these Spanx in a handful of department stores. Sarah calls up all of her friends that live in those cities, sends them some cash and says, buy out all the Spanx. And so they buy out. Well, next thing you know, Neiman Marcus wants it everywhere. So does Bloomingdale's. So does this, that, and the other. So now they're everywhere. Fast forward a few years. Sarah Blakely is doing a conference and she's talking about her story. In a Q&A time, someone raises their hand and says, Miss Blakely, how did you get noticed in those big trade shows where there's 1,000 exhibitors? How'd you get noticed? And Sarah leans forward and says, excuse me, trade show? I never went to a trade show. It was the very fact that she had a blind spot to know that was protocol. That was what we were supposed to do, that allowed her to jump right, chutes and ladders. She jumped straight to the top and has this great product. She's now a billionaire with a B. And all I'm saying to listeners now is, I don't know what your industry is. I don't know if you're a ministry or business or whatever, but I do know this. Every great leader I know said, I did have a vision for sure. But if I'd known then what I know now, I may have never started, or thank God I didn't know all that. I just would have maintained or done what everybody else was doing and never gotten noticed. I think we need that rookie smarts, even Mike in our 50s and 60s. We need rookie smarts. And in that chapter, if you remember, I talk about how to maintain rookie smarts as you get older. And I just think that's the key. Yeah.
Do you have to spend a lot of time thinking about that as you get older?
Oh,
now that especially since you've written it and you've raised the awareness of it, how do you do that as you lead?
People bring up these paradoxes and I go, shut up. Don't do as I do as I say. No, I'm kidding. It does happen. In fact, here's what's interesting. I have noticed when we do, every once in a while, Mike, we will do a meeting at Growing Leaders where we'll look at the books, the products, the services that we offer. And, Mike, this, at least right now, I've done all the books. So they're my babies. So we do a little exercise from time to time where we ask ourselves 3 questions. What needs a facelift? What needs an overhaul? And what needs a funeral? What needs a facelift? What needs an overhaul? So facelift is what program? This might be great for North Star.
That's really
good. What are we doing that just needs to be updated to this year? It's a great program. We just need to give it a facelift.
Yep.
Overhaul is, man, that was a great idea back in 1995. That is not. We need to overhaul this. We need to meet that need, but a whole different way. But here's the toughest: the funeral.
Yeah.
So I've had to leave the meeting before when my team member discusses a book that I wrote that we no longer want to sell. And I go, it's a great book. I wrote that, but it was written 1992 for Pete's sake, 30 years ago. So anyway, I'll stop there. But I feel like that's my application is I need to know, I need to listen to those 30 somethings. They see the future better than I do. And I just need to wince or leave the room or empower them and clap for them and say, I'm sure that's a great decision. I'll just cry over in the corner, here. So
it's so true because we, it's, the generation you and I have come out of, it's all about vision. It is
Yeah.
all, if you don't have a
Yes.
vision, and you have to have a vision.
Yeah.
But the reality is there's just some unknowns that you can't have a vision for. It used to be, what's your 3-year plan? Give me your
Yes.
vision
Yes.
for the next 3 years. How far out does the business world expect somebody to forecast on vision now? What would you say?
Well, I think with certainty, 18 months max.
18 months.
Yeah. But I think that's even then they're going to go, and especially post-COVID,
That's right.
we're going, well, we can put it in pencil, but I don't even know. We don't even know 6 months from now. Is there a new variant coming out? We don't know. So you're right. You said earlier, even the people that were supposed to be certain weren't certain. And Mike, if I can just share my bias now, when I look at kids today, they're looking up at us adult leaders, and we have no idea what we're doing.
Yeah.
What are they thinking?
Yeah.
I tell you what they're thinking. They need to see humility. We need to say, gee, I got to be honest with you. I don't know. Let's hit our knees. Let's do our homework. But I think when we've been bombastic, and some of us have been, it just is a turnoff. In some countries, a vast minority want to be leaders of the generation under 25 years old. And you know why it's a minority? They look at the leaders and go, I don't want to be like that. So I don't know. I want to be careful here. I don't think everybody old is bad. I'm old.
Right.
But I just feel like now's the time we need to say, I'm still learning. I'm still learning.
That's so good. And it doesn't replace vision. You have to have vision to lead. It's just being aware you're not going to have all the answers.
That's right.
And some of the blind spots are going to be the best thing.
Yeah, that's right. So here's what I would say. One of the paradoxes is stubborn and open-minded.
Yeah.
And here's what I would say. If you're stubborn about your vision, you have a chance of reaching it. If you're open-minded, you have a chance of taking others with you. Because only the sharp people that I want to take, I better be open-minded, because they're going to have an idea themselves that's probably better than my idea. So we follow the rule. I bet you do too. Best idea wins, even if it doesn't come from me.
That's so good. Your last one I want to talk about today is uncommon leaders embrace visibility and invisibility. This is powerful. It is powerful. So when you think about a leader who goes, I've got to be at everything. I have to be. So I'm 30, 40 years old. I've got to have my fingers in every decision. I've got to be in every meeting. What are they doing to themselves? And what are they doing to their church, company? We have tons and tons of athletic leaders, their teams, right? They're in every drill. They're the head coach, but they're in every infield, outfield, or they're in the wide receiver drills, the defensive drills. What are they doing if they don't embrace this visibility, invisibility? What would you say?
I think they destine themselves to limitations. I think if we want to scale, not fail, we're going to have to practice this particular paradox. So I think we hide behind responsibility. Well, I want to be responsible. I mean, they'll think I'm irresponsible if I'm not showing up in the meeting. Oh, no. I think after 1 year, you establish a sense of responsibility. Everybody looks at you and said, Mike, you're a responsible person. Okay. You don't have to prove it now, 15 years from now. My case study on this one, I absolutely loved studying and then communicating. It was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. So the skinny on him is this. The first several years of the civil rights movement, let's say from 1955 to 63, Dr. King was visible. He was very aware, I need to model the way, not just preach a good sermon. I got to protest, I need to march, I need to do the boycotts, I need to do those sit-ins. He got himself purposely thrown in prison just to set an example on the sacrifice he's willing to make. At the same time, you watch him after the I Have a Dream speech in August of 63. It's not that he doesn't do anymore, but he does only the things that he met with Lyndon B. Johnson in the White House. He didn't delegate that, but so many other things. He even stopped showing up at meetings. And a young John Lewis, remember Congressman John Lewis, would call him, Dr. King, where are you? King would go, John, you know what to say, you know what to do, because he knew John Lewis would defer to him if he was there in the meeting. Who's going to talk over Dr. King? He's won a Nobel Peace Prize here. So I know the coaches and leaders that are listening might go, well, that's not me. I'm not a Nobel. I understand. But there's a time when your presence, your agency, your authority is so tangible. The best gift you can give them is to say, I'm going to shut up or not show up. And I'm going to say, Josh or Terry or whoever, you do this. I've watched you. You've got it. You do this. And you speak as if you were me, because you know what to do. And that, of course, is that Moses Joshua thing that we know has to happen. But remember, even Moses was reticent to let go. He wanted to be responsible in Exodus 18. And Jethro said, you better stop doing this, man. You're going to die.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. So that one is a fun one. But I got to tell you, Mike, that's where I am right now. Yeah. I found my Joshua. Actually, it's a set of Joshuas, but there's one particular young 32-year-old leader here at Growing Leaders. I love him. His name's Andrew. And I can see him being one of several that will take Growing Leaders and, just really, but now, is he just like me? No, he's not. Thank God he's not. But I will say this, I think is a new iteration of Growing Leaders for the next day.
Yeah.
So I am so fighting. I'm not going to our weekly leadership meetings now. I want to, because I want to have a say, but I'm going, they'll not speak up if Tim Elmore's in the room. They just won't. So they're making decisions. Some of them I go, oh, I don't think I would have done that. But you know what? It's a new day. And I've got to spend the next few years passing this baton and being invisible more often.
Do you think that's one of the reasons there's been such a leadership gap in so many organizations where they can't find the next one because the first one was never invisible? They were so present, and especially this is true in the church world, especially this generation of the mega pastor leaves. And you look at those churches now and they are shells of what they used to be. Do you think that's a little bit of what you see there?
Mike, I think it's more than a little bit. As I travel the globe, I've been to dozens of countries. I watch a boomer generation leader refusing to let go. And I think they think it's right because, I know what I'm doing and I don't want to be responsible. But I see younger leaders going, well, I'll just leave. I love you, but I'm going to leave because I won't get to use my gifts here. So absolutely, I see it. In fact, here's something ironic. As I look at the boomer generation, and by the way, I am a baby boomer myself, I see extreme presence, which shouldn't be, and extreme absence. And when I say absentee leader, I'm talking about the Harvard Business Review article that came out. So many employees today say, the worst thing about my leader is not what they do, it's what they don't do. They're never showing up. But the reason they're not showing up is not because they want to pass on, response. The meeting's hard. They don't want to go to a hard meeting. So that's awful. So both extremes are wrong. We need to be intentional. And here's the process I've walked through. In my career, I've walked through I do everything, dumping. I'm so frustrated. I start dumping work on other people, but they don't stay around for that. Delegating, that's a little bit better. I plan ahead as I give work away, to developing. So it's doing, dumping, delegating, develop. The highest form of passing it on is say, my main goal is not just to get rid of work, is to develop you, Nancy, or Josh, or Heather, or whoever, and see that happen. Now the work is going to be a conduit, but that's where I think we need to live our life. Yeah.
I'd love to pin in on this a little bit, because I think a lot of leaders find themselves there. As you think about the next, and you think about what growing leaders will be like when another name or names is attached to it, not Tim Elmore's.
Yeah.
And you think of being invisible and what could happen. What are the things that go on in your heart as a leader that every leader needs to be aware of? Because I'm there. I'm in that. We've just clicked over to the fourth quarter of leadership for me. And I get it. I understand that.
Yeah.
What are the things I need to be aware of in my heart that I'm probably going to feel by design being invisible at things I used to be incredibly visible at?
Yeah. So one of my big problems is we have been so successful with certain products or resources back in 2008, 2009, 2015, successes in the past can be diminishing success in the future. You know that, right? Yesterday's success could be tomorrow's failure if we cling to it. So what I have to do is I need to baptize outcomes, not inputs. If I'm baptizing inputs, meaning I hold that sacred, what I'm doing is I just want to replicate that Habitude book again. Let's just do another Habitude book again. Well, no, it needs to be a digital platform. It needs to be video, and it needs to be short, and it needs to be this, that, and the other. So I feel like my problem is I remember so much how sweet that first partnership was with the San Francisco Giants or the Buffalo Bills or whatever we were doing. And I realize it's going to be a new way. But if I'm in love with the outcomes and I see Andrew and the rest of the teams getting outcomes, I can be happy.
Yep.
I don't even tell me about the inputs because I won't even understand it. I'm thrilled about the results that you're getting. That's what I have to do. So this might be helpful to listeners because I know you have all ages that listen. I don't know who it was that I first heard this from, but they were dividing life up into decades. The first decade of your life is memories. You're a kid just making memories, just playing around and goofing off. The second 10 years, your teens, are mischief. Okay. We could probably tell stories about the mischief of our teenage years. The next decade, our 20s, majors. So we're starting to figure out what we're going to major in and focus on. The next decade is mastery. You've mastered pastoring a church, mastery. But I think after that, your 50s, 60s, 70s, mentoring. I think it's really about, all right, I've mastered a few things, not everything, but a few things. I need to focus my attention now on winning at, passing it on, mentoring. And of course, I so believe in that, that. So I'm really attempting to spend a good chunk of my time finding ways to pour into the next generation and applaud them as they pass me up.
What I love about that, Tim, is that's where you began. The very first time I ever heard of Tim Elmore, it's almost that full circle. It was you had written a book on mentoring. And that was where I heard you speak years ago, probably in the late 80s, early 90s. And it was on mentoring, and it's like God birthed that in your heart long before you were the Tim Elmore we know now, where lots of people know who you are now. You are an amazing guy, Tim. If your team were to be interviewed about you, how would you want them to describe how you have led, mentored, loved them through this season? They're watching you live out these 8 paradoxes. How do you hope they describe you as a leader if they were writing about you in a book?
Yeah. Well, I would hope that they would use the word authentic. So I have many flaws, as we all do, but I really have a bunch. And I would hope they would say, well, he was sure honest with us about where he wasn't strong and where we needed help, in these places. Mike, I got to be honest with you. My favorite adjective that I try to pursue is the adjective life-giving. So a hyphenated word. I would hope they would say, oh gosh, that guy was life-giving. When I was around him, he breathed life on me. Even if he didn't share a new nugget that I'd never thought about before, I felt better. I felt like I could do it. I know that's how John Maxwell's been for me. And so I'm really am hopeful that they would use that term to describe me. But one more, I would hope that they would say, well, he figured out his strengths and he focused there. He didn't pretend to be someone he's not. Good. I'm going to do the accounting now. I'm going to do the tech at our office. Boy, that would be a joke. So he stuck to his strengths, and that's the value he added. He created content. So anyway, I'll stop there, but that's my hope anyway. Yeah.